Victoria announced to the whole management team, right there in the Monday morning meeting with every department head watching. Your leadership style is just too rigid for our culture. Not privately, no heads up, just out in the open I introduced myself calmly. I'm Colin Drake, 47 years old, operations director at Iron Veil Robotics for 7 years until about 10 minutes ago. I gave a single nod, closed my laptop and replied, "Understood." Victoria had only been president for 8 weeks, brought in by the investors who wanted someone with vision and presence to make the company more attractive for a buyout. She always wore designer suits, threw around buzzwords like synergistic alignment, and never once set foot on our manufacturing floor. I cleared out my office in just 22 minutes, no arguments, packing one box for personal items and another for the binders I'd carefully built over 7 years. Vendor contacts, pricing details, delivery schedules, the unseen framework holding it all together. As I packed, Victoria appeared in my doorway and said softly, "Colin, this isn't personal. We just need someone with a more collaborative style." I kept packing without a word. The past 4 quarters' results spoke for themselves. Numbers aren't everything in today's business world. I didn't bother explaining that those numbers, $12 million in annual revenue, up from $5 million when I started, came from relationships, from trust built slowly and deliberately with suppliers across the Midwest, through handshakes, site visits, and remembering the names of their kids. Victoria wouldn't grasp that my rigid leadership was exactly what kept raw materials flowing on time during the 2023 supply chain collapse, or that my outdated methods were why we could price our products 6% lower than competitors and still maintain solid margins. On my way out, I shook hands with my team, wishing them success, and I meant it. They were good people, deserving better than what was coming driving home. My phone lit up with messages. Shocked colleagues, confused vendors who'd somehow already heard, but I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled over at an overlook by the Mississippi River. For the first time in 7 years, I had nowhere to be at 1 p.m. on a Monday. "Congrats on your freedom," I muttered, watching barges push against the current below. I already knew what would come next. I'd seen this movie before. The early signs were in Victoria's office. The MBA jargon, the new vendor portal software she planned to roll out, the consulting firm she'd hired to modernize procurement. What she didn't realize was that every major supplier contract had been personally negotiated by me, based on handshakes and mutual respect, not some software platform. There was no transition plan because nobody asked for one. And now, nobody ever would. I joined Iron Veil when it was just a struggling company in a worn warehouse near the rail yard. Their product line, specialized factory automation components, was solid, but inconsistent delivery meant they couldn't win major contracts. The owner, Harold Blackwell, was an engineering genius but clueless about logistics. "I need someone to fix this damn supply chain mess," Harold said during my interview, pointing to a whiteboard full of delays and cost overruns. "You military guys get systems make this work, and I'll make it worth your while." After 15 years as an Army logistics officer, I knew how to build dependable supply chains, not by strong-arming vendors, which never lasts, but by forging mutual partnerships where both sides had skin in the game. I spent that first year traveling to every key supplier personally, learning their strengths, limitations, and goals. Some were small family businesses in places like Lima, Ohio, or Dubuque, Iowa. Others were divisions of large corporations where having the right connection with a purchasing manager meant priority when supplies were tight. By year 3, we had the region's strongest supply network. While competitors shut down lines due to parts shortages, we kept running. Our delivery reliability hit 98.6%. Customer retention climbed to 91%. Harold got it. "Whatever you're doing with these suppliers, keep it up," he said at monthly reviews. Best investment I ever made was hiring you. But Harold sold the company last spring, saying he was ready to retire, fish more, and visit his grandkids. The new investment group immediately started professionalizing everything: new software, reporting structures, KPIs, and finally brought in Victoria. The first crack showed up during her second week when she canceled my quarterly supplier visits, calling them an unnecessary expense in the digital age. The second was at a strategy meeting, dismissing my worries about changing payment terms with key vendors. "They'll adjust," she said confidently. "We're too important to them." The third hit when I overheard her telling someone on the phone that operations was stuck in the last century and needed fresh blood. I could have fought harder, tried to explain that our success was built on the very old-school approach she was tearing apart, that our suppliers worked with us because of trust, not just transactions. But I saw the pattern. I'd seen it in the military too. New leadership eager to make their mark by changing what already works. So, I started backing up my contacts, saving my notes, preparing for the inevitable. When it came, the only surprise was how public it was 3 days after I was fired. Thomas Franklin, chief engineer at Fwin Security, one of our biggest customers, called, "Heard what happened?" He asked. "Their loss. You free for lunch? No agenda. Just two old guys complaining about the world." We met at a downtown steakhouse. Thomas was pushing 60, with weathered hands from decades of building before moving into management. "So, what's next for Colin Drake?" he asked after we ordered, taking some time to weigh my options. Thomas nodded. "Heard from anyone at Iron Vale?" Radio silence. "Not surprised Victoria's already making waves. Announced a new vendor management system yesterday, mandatory for all suppliers." He studied my face. "You didn't set that up, did you?" "No. All our vendor relationships were personal, direct communication, real people solving real problems." "That's what I thought." Thomas leaned forward. "Look, Colin, I'll be straight with you. We're already seeing delays from Iron Vale. Nothing major yet, but warning signs are there. Your replacement's some kid from business school who talks about strategic procurement but can't tell the difference between grade 5 and grade 8 fasteners." I took a sip of water, trying to hide my reaction. It was happening faster than I'd expected. Thomas continued, "That's no longer your problem, but here's something interesting. Wyson Boworks is searching for someone to revamp their operations. Their CEO, Julia Winters, happens to be an old friend of mine. When I heard what happened to you, I mentioned your name. She appreciates that and she wants to meet you. They're expanding fast and their current system just can't keep up. Sound familiar?" It definitely did. Exactly like Iron Vale 7 years ago. As we wrapped up lunch, my phone buzzed with a text from Harold, my former boss. "Just heard, what on earth were they thinking? Call me." Driving home, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, I was beyond that, but something colder and more calculated. Victoria had made a grave mistake. She assumed the systems I built were interchangeable, that relationships could be handled by software and generic emails, that suppliers would stay with Iron Vale out of habit or obligation. She didn't realize I had structured every major contract to require a personal renegotiation each year. No automatic renewals, no standard terms, each customized with me as the sole point of contact. It wasn't sabotage. It was just how I always worked, embedding personal accountability into the system, my system. That evening I got my first email from Iron Vale since being let go, not from Victoria but from purchasing. "Urgent need vendor contact info for Midwest Precision. Their rep says they only deal with Colin Drake." I didn't respond. Instead, I called Harold, then Julia Winters at Wyson Boworks, followed by 3 other companies who tried to recruit me over the years. By Friday, I had 4 solid offers. By Monday, I'd made my choice. I wasn't just going to rebuild somewhere new. I was going to prove to Victoria exactly what she'd lost 2 weeks after my firing. I accepted the Chief Operations Officer role at Weissen Bowworks. They made specialized lab equipment, different products than Iron Veil, but with similar supply chain headaches. Julia Winters, their CEO, gave me full authority to overhaul their operations from scratch. "We need what you built at Iron Veil," she said during our final interview. "Our growth is outpacing infrastructure fix-it, and there's equity in it for you." On my first day, I walked the factory floor, talking to line workers to get unfiltered truths about what worked and what didn't. By day 3, I pinpointed critical weaknesses, unreliable deliveries, quality issues from key suppliers, and wasteful inventory habits. That Friday, my personal phone rang. Victoria Lang's name lit up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was polite but tense. "Colin, hope you're well. We're facing supplier transition challenges and wondered if you might be available for a brief, paid consultation." I didn't call back Monday morning. My assistant forwarded an email from Iron Veil's general contact form, an urgent request from Victoria Lang. I deleted it without reading. By Wednesday. She was calling my personal phone every few hours. I blocked her number. On Thursday, she showed up at Weissen's reception. "Mr. Drake is in meetings all day," the receptionist told her, following my standing instructions for any Iron Veil visitors. "Tell him it's urgent," Victoria insisted. "We have a major production delay that's going to cost millions." Watching via security feed from my office, I saw her wait 30 minutes before leaving, her perfect composure finally cracking that afternoon. I received a detailed email from Brian Cooper, my former assistant at Iron Veil, who'd become my eyes and ears inside complete chaos. He wrote, "Midwest Precision hiked prices 15% on the new contract. Valerie Components pushed delivery dates 6 weeks out. 3 other vendors mysteriously had capacity issues affecting only Iron Veil." Victoria had called 4 emergency management meetings just this week. I hadn't instructed any vendors to punish Iron Veil. I didn't have to. They saw how I was treated and drew their own conclusions about the new leadership. Many had worked with me for years across multiple companies. They knew who kept promises and who didn't. The next morning, Harold Blackwell called the board as starting to ask questions. He said Harold had kept a 15% stake after selling Iron Veil. Victoria blamed vendor hostility for the delays, accusing me of poisoning the well before leaving. "I've had 0 contact with any Iron Veil vendors since I left," I told him honestly. "I believe you," he said, "but she's convinced herself she's the victim." He paused. "They lost the Braxton contract yesterday. Couldn't guarantee delivery dates." Braxton Industries, a client I'd personally cultivated for 3 years before they signed on. It was one of Iron Veil's largest accounts. "Not my problem anymore," I said. "Of course not," Harold agreed. "By the way, how's the new job?" "Different challenges, similar solutions." I hesitated. "Might need some extra manufacturing capacity soon. Know anyone looking to sublease factory space?" Harold chuckled. "Funny you ask. I might have some leverage to help with that shortly." A week later, I got a formal letter from Iron Veil's legal team accusing me of violating non-solicitation agreements by interfering with vendor relationships. I forwarded it to Julia's legal department without comment. Their response came back within hours. No merit, no evidence, no concern. They were right. I hadn't solicited anyone. I'd simply stepped aside and let reality run its course. That night, I slept better than I had in months. About a month into my new role at Weissen, I got a LinkedIn message from Eleanor Hayes, Iron Veil's head of finance. We'd worked well together, both detail-oriented, process-driven, preferring results over politics. "Can we meet?" was all she wrote. We picked a coffee shop halfway between our offices. Eleanor looked exhausted, the kind of deep fatigue that comes from fighting losing battles. "They're blaming you for everything," she said after we sat down. "The vendor issues, production delays, lost contracts." Victoria built a story that you sabotaged the company on your way out. I stirred my coffee. That would have required planning I didn't have, given I was fired with only 10 minutes' notice. I know, but here's what you don't know. Eleanor lowered her voice. Victoria was brought in specifically to cut costs and prep the company for a quick sale. The investors want to flip it within 18 months. They need steady 20% margins. I pointed out Iron Veil was already profitable. Not profitable enough for them, she said. Your vendor contracts were too fair. They protected both sides. She pulled out her tablet and opened a spreadsheet. Look at these targets. They're under pressure to squeeze an extra 12% out of the supply chain. I examined the numbers. It's impossible without sacrificing quality or switching to overseas suppliers, which would cause months of production delays and ruin the company's reputation for reliability. There's more, Eleanor added. Victoria didn't fire you because of your leadership style. She fired you because you were the only one who'd push back on these targets. The rest of us were kept in the dark until after you were gone. That's why your firing was so public. I nodded, realizing it was meant as a warning to everyone else. Eleanor agreed. Exactly. And it worked. No one is resisting now. So why tell me all this? I asked. She closed her tablet. Because I handed in my resignation yesterday, I'm not going to be part of what happens next. She paused. There's a board meeting next week. They're considering emergency measures, including possibly closing the St. Paul facility and moving production to Mexico that would cost 200 jobs. Harold won't stand for that, I said. He's under heavy pressure to sell his remaining shares. They're making it hard for him to say no. I walked her to her car, thanked her for the information, and drove straight to Harold's house. I found him in the garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle. They're going to gut the company, I told him, relaying what Eleanor had said. Harold put down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. I felt the squeeze. They want my shares at 10% less than they're worth. Don't sell. Easy for you to say. I'm getting calls from their lawyers every day. I leaned on his workbench. What if there's another option? What if Wyson acquired Iron Veil instead? He stared at me. You're serious. Julia's eager to expand. She needs more manufacturing capacity. Iron Veil needs leadership that values its legacy. It makes sense. Victoria's investors wouldn't sell to you too much ego. They would if Iron Veil was collapsing, if their only hope to recover was a fire sale. I met his eyes. How soon before cash flow hits a crisis? Harold thought, at this burn rate, 6 weeks, maybe 8, especially if suppliers keep struggling and more customers walk like Braxton did. A slow smile spread on his face. Colin Drake, you calculating son of a gun. Not suggesting anything unethical, I clarified, just speculating on market realities. Of course, Harold nodded, purely hypothetical. That night, I drafted an email to Julia outlining a possible acquisition that would solve our capacity limits and give us access to complementary product lines and customers. I wasn't orchestrating Iron Veil's downfall. Victoria and her investors were doing that themselves. I was simply positioning Wyson to take over and save those 200 jobs in the process. For the next month, I focused on strengthening Wyson's operations. We introduced tighter inventory controls, optimized production flow, and set clear quality standards. Most importantly, I rebuilt supplier relationships using the same personal, mutually beneficial, long-term approach that worked at Iron Veil. Meanwhile, Iron Veil's situation worsened as predicted, not because I interfered, but because Victoria's aggressive cost-cutting and cold vendor management triggered natural consequences. 3 more clients suspended orders this week. Brian texted me. Production running at 40% capacity. Layoffs starting. I forwarded the update to Julia, adding it to the acquisition case I was building. She was initially skeptical but was warming to the financial benefits. If we move, it has to be soon, she said. before they lose more value. The next Friday, Thomas Franklin from Felwyn Security showed up unannounced at Wyson. "Got time for lunch?" he asked. "Over sandwiches," he explained. "We're pulling all business from Iron Vale, can't rely on them anymore." "Sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I felt no pleasure seeing good people hurt by poor leadership. "We need a new supplier," Thomas continued. "Someone who can deliver components without the drama, someone like Wyson." I set down my sandwich. "We don't currently make the same parts as Iron Vale." "But you could," Thomas smiled, "with the right equipment and expertise, hypothetically. What if Felwyn's ready to sign a 3-year contract with volume guarantees, enough to justify a new production line?" This wasn't just an opportunity for Wyson. It was leverage for the acquisition. A guaranteed customer base would increase Iron Vale's value and workforce appeal. "I'll discuss it with Julia," I said. "It's definitely interesting." That afternoon, when I brought the proposal to Julia along with updates on Iron Vale's decline, she made her call. "Make them an offer," she said, "but go through Harold first, test the waters before showing our full hand." That evening, I called Harold and explained the plan. He would approach Victoria's investors as a concerned former owner with a potential lifeline, an interested buyer willing to acquire Iron Vale at a reduced but fair price. "Don't mention you or me initially," Harold confirmed. "Just gauge their desperation." "Perfect." 3 days later, Harold called back. "They took the bait quicker than expected, barely negotiated. They want out before the next quarter's financials." "Did they ask who the buyer is?" "Of course. I said a private investment group they didn't press. They're too eager to stop the bleeding." We moved fast. After that, Julia assembled an acquisition team, with me providing detailed info on Iron Vale's assets, strengths, and capabilities. We structured the deal to retain as many employees as possible, people I knew personally, whose skill and dedication deserved better than Victoria's regime. 2 weeks later, with the preliminary deal in place, it was time to reveal Wyson as the buyer and me as the architect. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at Iron Vale's headquarters, exactly 3 months after my very public firing. That morning, I chose my suit carefully, not to impress Victoria, but to honor the moment. This was about restoration, not revenge. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into Iron Vale's conference room, followed by Julia and our legal team. Victoria's face when she saw me was worth every sleepless night of those 3 months. "What is this?" she demanded, glaring from me to Harold to her investors. Harold answered calmly, "Mr. Drake is here representing the acquiring company." Victoria jumped up, her voice sharp. "This is a joke. We're not selling to him." The lead investor, a lean man named Jeffrey Pearson, cleared his throat and spoke firmly. "The preliminary agreement has been signed. Wyson Bulwarks is acquiring Iron Vale's assets and Mr. Drake will oversee the integration." She insisted, "You can't do this. He's the reason we're in this mess. He sabotaged our vendor relationships." I stayed standing, hands clasped behind my back, steady. "I haven't contacted a single Iron Vale vendor since I left. I'd be glad to provide phone records, emails, and sworn statements to prove it." "Then how do you explain—" she began, but I cut in calmly. "What you're facing is the natural fallout of treating business relationships as mere transactions instead of genuine partnerships. Those vendors didn't need me to realize how little you valued them." Julia stepped forward, taking charge. "We're here to finalize the acquisition terms. Wyson will retain majority ownership. With Harold keeping his stake, we'll preserve the Iron Vale brand and maintain as many employees as operationally feasible." Victoria glanced toward Jeffrey and the other investors seeking support, but found none. They were cutting losses, and she'd become a liability to shed. Finally, she asked, "What about me?" Julia looked at me, then back at Victoria. "Your services won't be required during the transition or after." Victoria gathered her papers, hands trembling. "You planned this from the start," she accused. "You set me up to fail." I shook my head. "No, Victoria. You did that yourself when you decided relationships didn't matter, when you discarded 7 years of work without trying to understand it." She left silently. The investors remained, eager to close the deal and salvage whatever investment they could. I felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that justice had been done 6 months later. I stood on the manufacturing floor of the newly merged Wyson Iron Vale operation. We'd saved 185 of the original 200 jobs, consolidated administrative roles, and expanded production capacity. Most importantly, we'd rebuilt the vendor relationships that made Iron Vale successful. It took time, trust, and transparency, explaining our vision, honoring past commitments, and forging new partnerships based on mutual respect. The combined company was on course to reach $20 million in annual revenue, nearly double Iron Vale's peak. Julia had honored her equity promise, making me a minority owner with real stake in the game. As I finished my daily walk, Brian, now our production manager, approached holding a tablet. "Midwest Precision confirmed the new delivery schedule," he reported. "Valari Components agreed to the quality improvement program. They appreciate returning to the old ways." "Good. Let's visit both next month, see the improvements firsthand." Brian nodded. "By the way, heard anything about Victoria?" "Last I heard, she's consulting for a private equity firm in Chicago. Think she learned anything from all this?" I considered as we passed workers assembling lab equipment alongside robotics parts, the integrated product lines giving us an edge. "Probably not the right lesson," I finally said. "People rarely do." That evening I stayed late reviewing expansion plans. Harold stopped by on his way out. "Got a fishing trip planned this weekend." "You proved your point," he said, leaning in my office doorway. "Built it back better than before." "Wasn't about proving a point." Harold smiled. "Sure, Colin. Whatever helps you sleep at night." I returned to my paperwork, but my mind drifted to that day by the Mississippi. Watching barges battle the current, sometimes going with the flow, isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to push back, not with anger or revenge, but with quiet determination. I never set out to destroy Victoria or take over Iron Vale. I just refused to let good work be undone by someone blind to its value. That was revenge enough.